Michelle's gone.
You're live.
Okay, this is the Senate Transportation Committee reconvening this morning. And our discussion now is still on H 736, the transportation bill. And we are talking about an amendment, sponsored amendment, Senator Chittenden, about the Burlington International Airport's governance. And so with that, who would like to take, Anthea, would you like to take over? Or?
I can do a walkthrough.
We just set the table really quickly.
What is this?
I'll put it up.
No, that was you were just doing. Okay.
So since the testimony last week, and also both days from the mayor as well as the
Mayor beyond 11 o'clock.
the deputy mayor Winooski, as well as the two councilors from South Burlington, as well as Brian Searles at CCRPC. We took that feedback. When it's some email exchanges, I haven't included Senator Perzik on them, but between Michelle, Anthea, and I, we've made a few tweaks to the language that was presented to you all 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think Anthea is going to walk through it. The most notable changes, besides some small tweaks around the edges, is we added 2 additional voting seats, 1 additional one for the city of Burlington here at the mayor's call. So you'll see that in the language it currently proposes the mayor appoints 1 and then the Burlington City Council appoint 1. Maybe he'll weigh in on that when he speaks at 11. The other seat is from a call the chair of the South Burlington City Council that was echoed by the vice chair, which is to give the general aviation community at the Burlington International Airport a voice as well because of concerns. And that would include organizations like Beta, like the schools and otherwise. So having an individual, and in the language that you'll see in a moment, it proposes that the CCRPC appoint that seat. The other small tweak is that the previous voting seat from the CCRPC that was for regions or municipalities not included in Winooski, South Burlington, and Burlington. We brought in that language to be more inclusive, tying into some language from the environmental justice bill. So thank you, Anthea, so you can speak to that. But that I think will make sure that will guide the CCRPC to find communities that are sometimes underrepresented but are negatively affected by aviation noise and the impacts of the air use to have a seat at the table. And then the last 2 is that we, based on Charlie Baker's recommendation, we added 2 non-voting seats, 1 for the director of the CCRPC and 1 for the director of aviation at the Burlington International Airport, so that they can be part of all the conversations that would go forward should this be approved by the full Senate, House, and the governor. Does that help in setting the table?
Yes.
So could you repeat that?
Yeah. Word for word.
Quickly.
Okay, so this is posted to the committee page under today's date. I took out the highlighting since so much of it changed from H52 with the discussions that had happened. And then I'll just do my disclaimer again. Don't know who's listening.
No action in the House.
H52.
What is this?
H52 is a bill that has been introduced 3 bienniums now, introduced by Representative Townsend and others, asking for there to be a governance committee
But
instead.
did the House take any action on the bill? No.
Townsend is South Burlington.
The airport is in Maida Townsend's district.
So my disclaimer again is just I used to work for the city of Burlington. I did work for the airport, and the report that the mayor has mentioned a couple times, I did work on it. The report was not finalized until more than a year after I had started working here, but I certainly did a lot of work on the research and initial drafts of it. And I didn't write H52. It was written by Helena like 6 years ago, so it's been around for a while. I've just been working with Senator Chittenden to update it.
Right.
The mayor mentioned, we didn't mention you by name.
Right.
That's that. And so I understand why you're mentioning it, but I just want to clarify, do you think would be any conflict? I mean, you were attorney working for the city at the time, but I don't see a conflict.
I don't
know
see
you
a
mentioned
conflict
it.
either, but I think it's important that, everyone knows that I did used to work for the city of Burlington. One of the things I will point out here is I am not doing any work to lead to a different governance structure. I'm simply taking Senator Chittenden's words as to who should be on the committee. But to the extent that there is a report out there that I did work on that is on this topic that the mayor has said, you should look at this report.
Okay.
This person who now works for you worked on it. That is entirely accurate. I did work on it.
So thank you for acknowledging that, and it might be because in the political side of this, I have stated that report was not inclusive enough of all perspectives around the airport. It was charged for and paid for by the city of Burlington, and so it left out a lot of the aspects that have been called for over the years and other issues and frictions that have created because it was what I would say, I've used the term one-sided in its approach. Nothing against how you wrote it. It was factual in the history. I just don't think it considered all of the
It
implications.
was a Burlington report for Burlington. What you're proposing is a report to bring in other stakeholders.
Which was recommended to the city of Burlington by their aviation strategic committee in 2013 to do exactly this.
So that's an important consideration, recognizing the sponsor and the funder of any report, because that usually is one of the signals that there might be a potential conflict or whatever, so, or bias in the report. So we're very aware of the source and who paid for it. So it's with that knowledge. But it seems like what we're asking you to do is pretty straightforward and not take a position.
Yes.
You're not doing policy work, you're not making recommendations.
I'm not, and my job sort of prohibits me from doing that, which is great. I am your scribe. So in my capacity as your scribe, I have made changes to the language. So Senator Chittenden didn't include this in his little introduction bit, but one of the things that's happening here is the funding source for it. So in an earlier version of language that Senator Chittenden had been working on, I believe it was $50,000 in working with the Agency of Transportation. Michelle thinks that this is going to be more like $150,000 with the consultant and the potential neutral facilitator that would be contracted for. So this is taking $150,000 from the amount of money that is included in the proposed transportation program each year to help the city of Burlington with the non-federal match to draw down federal funds that the airport gets. So adding $150,000 for this study, that's
So we're taking it out of the 500.
taking it out of the 500. And this looks like a lot more than 500 because, I'll move this up so you can see it. For the amount of money that goes to the airport, it's 500,000 state T fund on line 2. So that's reduced by 150 for the study in the other language. The federal amount is staying steady at this, and then the local amount is increasing by $150,000, and that's to get the 90-10 split to have the total of just over 12.5 million. It could be that the city of Burlington would not put in the additional $150,000, but this is for purposes of the proposed transportation program.
So it's coming from Burlington.
It's not coming from Burlington, it's coming from the state transportation fund, but it is coming from, in the governor's recommend, which existed before, it was contemplated that there was going to be this study, the historic $500,000 amount that the state has been giving to the city of Burlington. And I believe it's been $500,000 for years.
Right, but if Burlington, when local is only Burlington, there's no other locality, right? So if Burlington does it, would it change the amount of federal money that can be drawn down?
Yeah, so if the local amount is less, you would not have your 10% to match the 90%.
4.6.
Yeah.
So it used to be $1 million and it was lowered to 500,000. You keep saying to Burlington, but would you say there's a distinction between Burlington and the enterprise fund that is the airport? I should have asked this, Steve. My apologies.
No, we used to give $1 million and trying to get their attention a few years ago about state funding, so we cut it to 500.
I will rephrase what I said. It is the amount of money that the transportation program authorizes for purposes of drawing down federal money for the Burlington International
So
Airport.
ultimately, the city of Burlington would be paying for it because we're giving them less money for the match to draw down federal dollars, which they would have to replace.
Or there would be less
Or
federal funding.
lose those federal dollars.
90%.
That's a big hit.
Yes.
That wouldn't necessarily come from the Burlington taxpayers. That doesn't happen. Instead, it would be the Burlington International Airport drawing from the revenue sources they generate from the private carriers and the rent leases and what they use, what they get from the use.
Yeah, so there's the passenger facility charge that is money that the airport gets that it's allowed to have that then goes towards the non-federal match. So this is saying that for purposes of that non-federal match, the amount that the state transportation fund is providing would be 350,000 as opposed to 500,000.
If I may, one more thing, Chair. So the airport, I'm not going to say it's flush with revenue sources, but they did recently raise their rental car taxes. And so they generate this monies that can be used for these local matches in a variety of ways. This would not in any way put a burden on the Burlington property taxpayer. This is all confined within the airport enterprise fund and would draw from revenues that the airport creates.
So in essence, it's to the enterprise fund.
Can this, just as for background, can the city, they have control over the enterprise fund, could they draw from the enterprise fund? They wanted to.
There are restrictions, but I'm under the impression every year, Councilor Emery spoke to this, that in historical years past, they do get transfers, offsets to pay for services that the city of Burlington provides for the airport, like HR services, the mayor's, some of his time is spent overseeing the airport, some of his salary comes from there.
And I believe also everything in terms of the Board of Finance, if it's a large enough amount, and the City Council, if it's a large enough amount, it goes through that process.
Money comes from the airport enterprise fund to the city of Burlington. And not since, in my research, since 1948 has money come from Burlington taxpayers to the airport. Does that make sense?
But for purposes of like the approval process, when they're having like these large projects at the airport, those are all going through the City Council through like its procurement process and things like that. And the car charge, it's the CFC. So you'll hear those acronyms like the passenger facility charge, I think the car facility charge.
Which is in
So like
AKA the car rental tax.
yeah, but like so every time you're flying into an airport, you're like paying a fee to the airport basically.
Right.
Okay, and then the footnote would be changed accordingly. So there's a footnote in the white book that currently says appropriation excludes 11,385,000 of FAA funds and 765,000 of local funds for this purpose. So it's just tracking in the white book with that note. The
So you've
changes.
added the 150 to get to the 950.
Are people good on the funding source? No real
Do they
change.
know that? Anybody know that? They're probably watching that, I'm sure.
And this is posted online too.
So,
Okay. Creation, nothing has changed in creation since H52, except for the tweak that this committee wanted to see in terms of sort of not presupposing what the examination would be. So examining the existing governance structure and alternatives to the existing governance structure at the airport. Membership, Senator Chittenden went through this a lot. There have been a number of changes to this language since the last time you saw it. So instead of it just being composed of 7 voting members, it would be 9 voting members and 2 non-voting members. All the members that were in the original iteration from H52 were made voting members, and then there were 2 additional voting members added and 2 additional non-voting members added. A change in the voting member appointed by the governor is that it used to need to be someone with airport experience, and that was stripped out because there's now going to be the consultant. So there will be airport governance experience through the consultant. So it'll be 1 voting member appointed by the governor, 1 voting member designated by the mayor of the city of Burlington, additional 1 voting member designated by the city council of the city of Burlington. So you're getting 2 from Burlington there. 1 voting member from the city of South Burlington, 1 voting member designated from the city of Winooski. That's the same, that was in H52. 1 voting member designated by the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. There was always that designation, but who would qualify and who the representation is for has changed. And this is the language that was drawn from S-148, which is in the Environmental Justice Bill. So it would need to be someone to represent individuals such as Black, Indigenous and persons of color, BIPOC, immigrant, individuals with low income, and individuals residing in disadvantaged communities, which is defined in a federal executive order tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And it needs to be that representation and the representative individuals need to be adversely affected by the airport. And it would be up to the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission to make that determination and that designation. Now we're getting to our additions. One voting member designated by the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission to represent the general aviation organizations at the airport. No change on 8, but the Secretary of Transportation or designee is a voting member. And then you've got one voting member designated by the president and CEO of the Lake Champlain Regional Chamber of Commerce. That has not changed, but it was made a voting member. And then adding our 2 non-voting members, 10 and 11, the current, including acting or interim director of aviation for the airport or designee, non-voting, and the director of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission or designee, non-voting. Subsection E has changed to reflect the process that Michelle had talked about last week about how there would be an RFI and there would be an RFP, and the Agency of Transportation would work with the committee in the development of the RFI and the development of the RFP. In addition here, beyond what you heard Michelle, or beyond what I heard Michelle talk about in committee last week, is there would also be the ability for the agency in its provision of administrative, technical, and legal assistance to contract with an additional person. And when we use person, that's individual, corporation, partnership. So it wouldn't need to be a human being necessarily, it could be an entity, to serve as a neutral facilitator for the committee if such assistance cannot be provided by an employee or employees of the Agency of Transportation. And it is left to the Agency of Transportation to make that determination. And then subdivision 2, that's the process that we just talked about with the preparation of the request for information and the preparation of the request for proposal to retain that independent third party to work as the consultant. Powers and duties have not changed since the earlier language that you saw. It has changed dramatically from H52 in that it references the 4 options that were identified in the June 10th, 2013 recommendations from the Burlington International Airport Strategic Planning Committee. And those are, just to refresh everyone's memory, retaining the existing governance structure, having the state take over the airport, vesting the Board of Airport Commissioners for the airport with governance authority over the airport, or creating an...
Go back to B.
Yep.
What would that be under? A preemption? I mean, the ownership is now with the city of Burlington. What legally can the state, you'd have to have some basis, right? To make it, to move the ownership to state owned?
So
would that be eminent? Normally eminent domain is the structure by which you acquire property against the owner's will. So I'm just wondering, having a consideration that comes with a lot of legal questions in my mind as part of the report. I'm just kind of struggling with a takeover by the state of a municipal owned entity. And so it's one thing about the governance, but actually ownership. So I'm just having a response to what that really means.
So to Michelle's credit, she did say this is just not going to happen. She said she doesn't see that feasible at all. And so in my discussion, I said, I actually agree with you, especially if Burlington doesn't want to do it. And since we didn't know, I said we can leave it in there for the committee to understand why this isn't feasible. The other option that was originally on the table in the studies that were done in the 80s was privatization. But as you heard from Brian Searles and Brad Worthen, they were equally dismissive of that. So if this committee doesn't even want them to consider it, it certainly could be just taken off the table. But who knows? Maybe if the mayor's representative sees merit in at least having the committee consider the state taking over the airport, that's why I thought leaving it in there.
It's not going to be any harm, but just leave it there for now. But yes.
Michelle Boomhauer from my Agency of Transportation. I think the clarification here is that these were efforts that were examined in the prior study. And so it's simply listing what's previously been reviewed, and then the committee would at least, I think, consider what had previously been reviewed for recommendations and then move from there. So it's not saying like there's a reason we should study the state taking it over, because
so it's back to the June 30th of 2013 recommendations.
And one thing, and we haven't gotten to the language yet, but it's important to just focus on the fact that this is requiring the committee to examine the advantages and disadvantages of each of the following. But then they're also supposed to examine the advantages and disadvantages of any additional governance structure options for the airport recommended by the consultant or identified by a majority of the voting members of the committee, identify any other issues related to it, and then make recommendations on the governance structure of the airport as supported by a majority of the voting members of the committee. So if in doing all of this analysis and examination and working with the consultant, there are so many more disadvantages to advantages to any of those options that they were required to examine, or the ones that they choose to examine beyond those four, they don't need to make any recommendations on it. They don't need to do a thorough analysis of it. It doesn't need to be in the report. If you want to not require that the subdivision be on line 18 be something that is examined, it could still end up being examined if the majority of the members.
Well, let me ask, did the June 2013 recommendations, were there more of them than the 3 that are listed here?
4 and no, all 4 from that report.
So why do we have to restate them? Just have them look at the options identified in the June 13th report recommendation.
We don't. I think it would be helpful, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it would be helpful for this body to understand the different options and the work that's been done prior, and maybe things have changed in the last 9 years or 10 years, however many it has been. But I would just say that the recommendation that I included in the email, their conclusion was not one of their multiple recommendations was to work with the state and other regional parties to study regional governance. And so it wasn't necessarily prescriptive that it definitely needs a regional authority and that it could possibly be a state ownership or something.
But I was just thinking, rather than stating them again here, just review the options that were identified by that strategic planning committee and let it go with that, because there have been multiple reports in the past, as I understand it. And so one might think that you'd go back and look at whatever exists in terms of that. I guess I'm just saying, it's one thing to say, look at the options, examine the options that were identified, end of sentence.
Sure.
So if I were drafting to do that, what I would do is I'd take out the following on line 14, and then I take out A, B, C, and D.
That's what I'm thinking, that it's just inherent in asking them to look at that report and the options identified.
Works for me.
And then it doesn't
Yes,
create that visceral reaction that I just had.
State ownership.
Do you want questions as we go through, or just have it?
No, go ahead.
Because I wondered, Senator Chittenden, why was suggested Winooski specifically, not Williston or other towns that are close to there, but it makes sense, South Burlington, but was there a reason?
So Winooski and South Burlington have been the most vocal on topics related to this over the years. I would also say Williston is as impacted, but over the years, Williston leadership, I'm not going to speak for all the voters of Williston, but in these discussions over the years, Williston leadership has not been as eager to have a voice in these things. There was a noise advisory committee where they also didn't have somebody actually sit at the table. If Williston is watching this YouTube and wants to have more of a voice, I welcome that input as soon as possible.
What are the RPCs doing? Can you scroll back? Because we did have some discussion about that.
I would expect Charlie Baker, who has 2 appointment pieces with certain categories, to really look at the Williston, Essex, Colchester,
Right.
does abut the area that is.
There's a lot of traffic.
But Williston gets a lot of the traffic to the airport.
I would love for Jenny Lyons to be on this committee, so that she's right there.
Okay.
Okay, we went through the powers and authority, and then the end result is going to be the making of the recommendations on the governance structure of the airport is supported by a majority of the voting members of the committee. And then another thing to remember, and we went through the process of how the committee is going to get its consultant from the Agency of Transportation. I think a lot of the deliverable and the process, that's all going to be worked out in the RFP and the selection of that consultant. And I think you are, in drafting it this way, leaving it to the agency to work with the committee, meeting these different requirements from the designations and the appointments to figure out the scope of the project.
One of the things that we talked about, though, is recognizing that anything we did would not have a negative economic impact. Are we coming to that?
Yep.
Okay.
So the report and the recommendations, elaborating on 4 that they have the power and the authority to make these recommendations. So in the report, on or before January 15th of 2024, and that's been pushed out 1 year. It used to be January 15th of 2023, and that's because it's going to take time to get the consultant and have the consultant do the work. The committee shall submit a written report to the General Assembly with its findings and recommendations. And this is an addition that this committee wanted to see made beyond H52. Any recommendations from the committee shall address how to ensure that there are not negative financial impacts on the city of Burlington. And then for the meetings in subsection H, the Secretary of Transportation or designee shall call the first meeting of the committee to occur on or before September 30th of 2022. I believe that used to be June 15th, but it's giving the agency more time to work on the RFI and get the ball moving there. It's not requiring fast appointments and designations, and it's not requiring people to meet over the committee. We'll get to this in the very last subsection, but you are also only authorizing the per diem and the reimbursement for expenses for 6 meetings if they're not paid, their salaries are not covering it. The committee shall select a chair from among its voting members. It used to just be members, but now it's only the voting members that would be able to serve as the chair. A majority of the voting membership of the committee shall constitute a quorum. And then the committee shall cease to exist on January 16th, 2024. And I think that's important because that's 1 day after when they need to get the report back to you, which does not sort of create the expectation that they're going to be able to say, and we should look at this in the future. They exist for a discrete period of time, final deliverable, and then the committee ceases to exist. There's also,
ALG would pay the per diems.
it would come from the 150,000. And then just on the ceasing to exist piece, that's something that's coming from the General Assembly's focus with the Sunset Advisory Review Board. We want to like make it clear that committees don't exist anymore.
We
So
say it'll sunset, so then it'll sunset, so we can get my sunset.
Yeah, there you go. Come on, sunset. Nothing ever
are you gonna
sunsets.
sunset the Sunset Advisory Committee?
I've seen a lot of sunrise.
I like that, cease to exist, it's not even sunset, you're just, you
That's
know,
it.
you're
Gone.
oblivious.
Yeah. the
And that
sunset.
is actually, I believe, from our drafting manual for the template for study committee. And then compensation reimbursement, members of the committee who are not employees of the state and who are not otherwise compensated for
That's our
their,
standard, we
yeah,
don't pay you twice.
and that's the standard amount of the per diem and the reimbursement, and it's not more than 6 meetings. So just when the 6 meetings was included in H52, it was a shorter window for how long this was going to take to happen. It was going to start in the summer and then it was going to be done 6 months later. This is now going to be a 15-month process potentially.
Oh, we normally put in 6 meetings per year,
We could change it to,
since it goes over.
you could up it to like 9 meetings and then it, I can easily draft it to say 9 meetings. Let's leave it at that.
Or not more, so it doesn't mean that we'll definitely be at meetings. Michelle loves meetings, so.
Yeah, Michelle doesn't have a.
Senator Mazza, if I may, what I would point out is that this committee will probably not convene until September if it is authorized. There will be some preliminary behind the scenes work we would do to get ready for the first committee meeting in terms of the RFI, et cetera. Appointments, yeah, those things. So the actual working time frame for the committee is kind of September through December, say, of the following year. And I would say 6 meetings will be adequate. I don't know, maybe there's a way to allow for the committee to have more than 6 meetings, but I don't want to create more meetings if we don't need them.
So it says for not more than 6 meetings. If you made it for not more than 75 meetings, it still might end up being not more than 6 meetings, but you're not allowing the compensation for that. Maybe.
And they can meet for March 6th.
Yes.
You just can't-
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. That's fine.
And I suspect most everybody would have.
And then we shall call that person Jane.
Yeah. Okay, anything else?
That's it for me in terms of the walkthrough.
Okay.
You have me for another 5 minutes and then I need to leave.
Okay, all right. Any other questions from the at this point? Yes.
S52, or H52, is that a assigned to transportation or GovOps or?
I believe in the first year that it was introduced, it was referred to House Government Operations, and then it was recommitted to, or re-referred, I can't remember what the phrasing is, to House Transportation. And I believe for the last 2 years, it has gone to House Transportation, and I will confirm at least for this year.
And they've
whether it's-
never had a hearing as far as you know?
When Representative McCormick was the chair of House Transportation, he would allow every sponsor to come in and do like a 5-minute pitch. I do not believe, it is in House Transportation now, I do not believe that Representative Landfer has had the same approach. I have not been there when Representative Townsend has come in, and it is not appearing as having any committee activity.
Thank you.
Like, that's amazing.
Thank you, Leah. Appreciate it.
Should take 3 million out of maintenance.
One change.
Okay, we are going to switch to our honored guest, the mayor of Burlington. Good morning, welcome.
Thank you, Senator.
You come in this building and you may be running for Congress or something. Everybody's running for something here.
I am very excited about the job that I have, Senator. I'm excited to, yes, there's plenty to do.
You got your 50 person. I don't think you have 8-hour days. I think you're a lot longer than that from what I read every day. It's not a dull job. Well, welcome to the committee. And you've heard all the different points of views and things. So just go right ahead, comment on whatever you want to do. Yours.
Great, thank you, Senator. It's very nice to be in person with you all. I apologize for the technical glitch that interrupted the
I just want you to know we didn't shut you off. Okay? It was on your end, okay?
I believe it is. I believe it was on our end, and I apologize for that. But I'm almost happy that it happened, so that we could have this additional opportunity to meet.
We pull the plug off.
I think it's much better that we be able to talk in person, and thank goodness for Zoom over the last couple of years. But I think this is better, and I appreciate the chance to be with you. Thank you for carving out additional time in your schedule. I have tried to follow all the other testimony that you've taken over the course of the session. Obviously was here for the last 25 minutes. I think I have a good sense of where the discussions are, and really I'm glad to engage it further. It is possible I missed something, but I hope not. First of all, I did want to start some of what I've heard. I have heard some statements and potential ideas that are not consistent with my understanding of the facts and understanding of kind of what options are available to us. So I wanted to start by trying to address some of them. First, I have heard, and this has been said many times over the years by other parties, for questioning whether, how significant the city of Burlington's financial commitment to the airport has been over time, suggesting that it might be overstated, to suggest that the city of Burlington and its taxpayers really have owned and invested in this asset, that this is, not necessarily in your proceedings, but outside. I've heard suggestions from other municipalities that the airport might be sort of essentially some kind of pass-through entity, that the city of Burlington has some kind of distant relationship with, marginal relationship. And I just want to, one reason I have shared the report that we did and really urge everyone involved in this issue to make me look carefully at it, is I think, from my mind, it really puts that question to bed. I mean, there's no doubt that in the first 30 years of the existence of the airport, the equivalent of what would be in today's dollars, many millions of dollars, were invested, subsidized by City of Burlington taxpayers to get the airport through those early years. And the City of Burlington continues to have very significant financial interests to this day. The City of Burlington's full faith and guarantee stands behind the $26 million of debt that the airport has currently. And it is accurate for, I think, all of that debt at this point, although there were times as recently as the 70s where we did direct general obligation borrowing for the airport, as the report speaks to. Now it is all revenue bonding, and so it's backstop debt. But, you know, I haven't quite gotten to this point in my life yet, but I think any of us who have, perhaps some of you have had the experience of putting, you know, a backstop guarantee behind your children's credit card, or maybe signing on some kind of lease or a mortgage. That backstop guarantee is a real guarantee. There's real risk involved. That's why it matters to the markets that the city do that. And so this is real ownership, and any suggestion otherwise, I really take issue with. I've also heard the suggestion, and I think I caught some of it in the discussion with Anthony a moment ago, that and I appreciate the kind of sentiment behind this, that perhaps we could come up with some kind of structure where the city of Burlington continues to receive some kind of payment. I think there's a thought, again, you know, not necessarily something I've heard from colleagues at the table here, but something I have heard over the years, that reason that the mayor is opposed to a transfer is because the city of Burlington's making all sorts of money on the airport, and that's what's driving our position, and that's what would need to be maintained. I want to be really clear that is not the basis of my position, at least, and it really can't be the basis of the city's position, in the sense that all payments that are made to the city of Burlington are for services rendered. There is no, particularly at this point, I think there may have been moments in the history of the airport where there was some creativity, if you will, around an attempt to, in the management payments, do something to help with the city's broader financial issues. Such efforts, and I'm saying that sort of speculating, just because I've heard so many people talk about it. Such efforts are against the law. They are against federal rules, which limit the diversion of revenue, airport revenue, to local governments. They certainly, over the last 10 years, as we talked about last year, when we have been so focused on turning the airport's finances around, and when I made that a sort of central commitment of this administration out of this period where the airport was challenged, the airport can't afford that. The payments that are made to the city, I'm not saying you might not find some small amount of savings somewhere. Maybe you could pay some law enforcement agency less than the Burlington Police Department is paid, but you're not going. That's not because there's some piggishness happening here. It's not because there's some over allocation of officers to the airport. We have the officers. There are 8 officers that are assigned to the airport, and that 8 is a function of years of direct negotiations with the federal government, with the FAA, about what the appropriate security from local law enforcement is. I'm hopeful. It's well publicized that we have serious person power issues in the Burlington Police Department right now. It would be great if we did not have to allocate 8 officers out there. And there's actually an opportunity coming where we may get there. Because we've been successful with Senator Leahy in particular's help. We're building this new, it's in construction right now, this new facility that will have one gate for all people, passengers coming in will go through this one TSA checkpoint that is being built right now. That may allow us to reduce the number of officers that need to be, because you don't have 2 checkpoints, because you have 1. We're hopeful that we're going to be able to reduce the numbers of officers still further, but we're already below what sort of a first reading of federal regulations would require. They've already shown some regulatory flexibility with us. And I just think it's important to understand that the payments that are made at the airport are for services rendered. If the city of Burlington isn't doing that anymore, you're going to have to pay for legal services and administrative services from some other entity. I don't believe, any reason to think that those are going to be of the sort of magnitude that you could essentially double pay for those things, pay someone new to do it and continue to pay the city of Burlington. And even if somehow you could, I think would be against federal law to have some kind of, and that's not just my opinion, our attorneys believe would be against federal law for that diversion requirement for lease payments of $500,000 a year just to be made to the airport. And the suggestions of specific revenues, I think I heard a little bit of it this morning, that maybe PFCs or CFCs, the car rental company revenues could somehow backfill. Those are highly regulated revenue streams that need to be spent on very specific uses. And I don't believe there's any reason to be optimistic that those could be sort of increased to fill this gap.
Just a question to clarify.
Yes.
Obviously, you're cost allocating and compensating for the law enforcement and the functions that you talked about. Is there actually lease payment to the city of Burlington, something in lieu of taxes, but
South Burlington gets quite a bit of money for
you get the pot, okay. But there's nothing, a lease payment from the enterprise back to the city of Burlington.
There really isn't. There's the administrative allocation, and
So, that's very, well, I think that's really important to be clear too, when people are saying, gee, somehow the city of Burlington gets enriched, when in fact, if there's no lease payment and what you're getting paid for has to be very specifically identified, and then there are constraints within the federal rules and standards that have to be met. So with all of that said, then what does the city?
why do we? Sorry.
Well, yes, I guess, because I'm sure because people come, they would stay. I mean, it's good for the economy of the region, including the city, but in terms of direct compensation, it's much more indirect at this point, other than reimbursement and cost allocation of your time and legal staff, et cetera.
Right. Which of course does, in some maybe very modest way might reduce, the taxpayer burden a very, very little bit, but that's really not what's driving. I appreciate the question, and I'm glad. I think we are. I think, as you just stated, it is exactly right. Why does the city of Burlington continue to want the airport? I think from my perspective, it's the same reason that motivated the city of Burlington to start the airport 100 years ago. We believe that the airport plays an important role in the local economy, including Burlington's economy. We are proud of our stewardship over the last 100 years. And we're very committed to it, and we think, and we think it needs to continue. And I certainly think it is possible, and I think this is a key point. I am certainly, and I'm sure my colleagues on the city council are open to the possibility that there is another way that the airport could be managed that would have a similar performance record to what we've done. However, to get to that would take an enormous amount of work. And this is a key point of the report that we have done. There would be a great deal, I've been involved with an attempt to have our emergency dispatchers moved into some kind of regional operation. It has taken years, well, decades really, but even on my watch, years of hard work to try to get there. And we still haven't gotten it done. We're hopeful. I don't know if this is coming across your plate somehow, or I think it's a different committee, but
no, I understand. It's the dispatch proposal, and the city of Burlington's interested in being one of the regional dispatches.
We're interested in a regional entity. There are all sorts of labor issues that need to be sorted out. In this case, there will be all sorts of financial debt. Who's going to take on those backstop guarantees?
Sure.
So I'm sorry. I'll just finish really quickly, but given how much work it's going to take, I think there has to be a really strong, compelling, big problem that is going to be worth everybody's time to do that. And that's where,
The testimony that we were given by South Burlington and Brian Strokes, were you able to listen to their?
I didn't listen to it, but I read a summary of it, yes.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you had a response to that. And I'm sorry, Tom. you interrupted.
So yes, I paid attention to that testimony. I've had years of off and on conversations with Senator Chittenden, who I hope it's clear to everyone I have a great deal of personal goodwill towards and appreciate the way in which we've worked together and see a lot of the world the same way. We've had I think, ongoing, we have not quite had a meeting of minds on this issue. I certainly understand that in people in South Burlington and Winooski, and to a lesser degree perhaps some of the other municipalities, question the way in which they're represented under the current governance structure. I think my answers to, I think there is significant representation. I don't think my arguments on this have been persuasive to everyone, but just to quickly repeat them here, I mean, we have just added, of course, to this airport commission that gives a formal role to Winooski now, in addition to South Burlington in the governance. I know it is, and I hope my point last time was clear here. It is true that is an advisory commission, but an advisory does not mean unimportant, does not mean inconsequential. It is an important part of the oversight that I'll tell you, I, as mayor, and the city council put a lot of effort into. It'd be very unlikely, I can't think of a time it's happened in the last decade when the commission has said do this and in our advisory capacity, and we haven't listened to that advice. In addition, there are, of course, federal processes that guide a lot of the public engagement. And so I think it is somewhat wishful thinking to think that those processes around major decisions, such as the F-35, such as the sound program, that those processes would happen in a very different way. You would have the same federal oversight guiding the way in which those processes take place. And I don't think people would find them a whole lot more satisfying or different than they do currently. Finally, I think we do have regional governance in the state of Vermont, and I think that's you all. I think the state we are a small enough state, the state plays a very significant role in what would be county level decisions elsewhere. And there is a place for just people who are unsatisfied with the actions of the city of Burlington are able to come to the state and make direct communications to the state and are not unrepresented.
The manager of the airport? Is that a selection committee, national? Is that a local committee decision? Who picks the director? Because they're going through a transition now because one is left.
Right.
Yes. Who picks that person?
The director of the airport is an appointment of the mayor. And the charter does require the mayor to consult with the commission, include the commission in a search committee when making hires. And so that's how this is going to play out. We've been going through a period here I thought was important. I have a lot of confidence in Nick Longo, the current acting director, and I haven't been in a rush to go to the next stage of securing a permanent director, but we will be doing that soon. And when we do, we'll set up a committee. We'll have the commission will decide the 2 members that will serve on that committee, and that committee will hopefully make recommendations to me on multiple candidates and then be selected from there. So that is ultimately, absolutely, it's a decision of the mayor, again, through the mayor doesn't have absolute power. As we've all seen, the city council has to confirm mayoral appointees.
I really appreciate and respect and agree that changing the governance, studying the governance is no small chore. And you spoke to that in your testimony, and it was in the original report. And one thing I'd like to hear more of your thoughts on is regarding that lease payment. So that lease payment notion of if there was a regional authority where the city of Burlington maintained ownership of the land, and then the regional authority would have to pay for the use of that land, that was put to me by your past aviation director, Gene Richards. My question to you is, do you not think that it's worth the study that this could actually reveal to the city of Burlington, where more of your attention could be focused on the city of, just as a possibility. Maybe it just recommends we stick with what we're doing, or we strengthen the airport commission, but wouldn't it be worth exploring to understand if there is a legitimate and federally approved financial benefit to the city of Burlington to reward you all for the investment you made 190 years and 80 years ago? Do you see some merits in us, having a professional study and looking at this as was called for in
And is that
2013?
lease a permissible payment?
And it's a permissible payment or not?
So again, I don't believe that it would be a permissible payment. I think your question is fair, and I do feel some sense of uncertainty that perhaps there could be some creative structure that could be found. I'm skeptical of it because there have been many past efforts to find a way for the city of Burlington to receive direct compensation. Then Mayor Sanders back in the 80s wanted there to be just $300,000 a year, $200,000 to $300,000 a year payments. Went to Washington and tried to secure it and was told, that's a very interesting idea, Mr. Mayor, and you can try to do that, but it's going to be 20 years before you're going to have to go through a court process to do that. And this may be somewhat apocryphal. This is how I've heard it told down over the years, but it's told you're going to have to go through the courts to do that. And in the meantime, you're not going to get any money from the federal government. But point taken, and I guess I would say this, and this is, I think, fundamentally where I'm at. I am concerned you are on the cusp of making a decision to start a study that will be very costly in terms of taxpayer resources and staff time, with a very broad mandate to look at a lot of things. And I'm not optimistic about that study, and I can't remember exactly. I wasn't sure exactly where I got caught off in this, but let me just, at the risk of repeating, I think I was cut off before this, but we're about to do what many communities have done. Many places have looked into studying governance, and this has been such a frequent occurrence that this one national law firm that does a lot of these, has been involved in a lot of these, they issued this sort of cautionary warning. They said the committee proposal. They said numerous communities, this is quoting this other, not City of Burlington law firm now, numerous communities across the country have examined airport governance, while a few communities have made significant voluntary changes to improve performance in the absence of dramatic circumstances. So in the sometimes they've done, even if there isn't some dramatic circumstances, they made some changes. There's a larger group of communities that have considered but declined to make such changes. Many studies proved inconclusive, or the political will was lacking to effect a large-scale change, such as the transfer of power from a general purpose government to a single purpose authority. They went on to make two other key recommendations. The community must realistically examine the potential motivations for making a change in the governance structure, and the community should not neglect the full range of options short of a large-scale transfer of power. And my respectful request would be for the committee to consider whether, as an alternative at this moment to commissioning a full-scale I think we heard from the Department of Transportation, probably be more than $100,000, that there be at least the intermediary step, the first step of tasking. And I cleared this suggestion with Secretary Flynn before making it here. And Secretary Flynn and I have worked well together on many issues, and I'm confident we work well together on this, that an alternative action could be to task Vermont Agency of Transportation to meet with the city and other municipal stakeholders and report back by January 15th on a targeted number of issues, give better definition to what the regional concerns are, what is the problem here we're trying to solve. I really don't think your draft motion does that, really defines what the problem is, and two, explores whether there are ways in which these concerns can be addressed in more targeted interventions that are that come short of the transfer of power. And and I think within that, and maybe I didn't maybe completely anticipate exactly what you just asked, Senator, and come bring it back to your question. If you were to endorse some kind of, and this is something that Secretary, I feel could be done quickly. I think we just heard that, a study committee would take a while to set up and then get done. We could have this back to you by the time you start your session next session. We could come back and say, we could answer those questions I just listed, and maybe we could add some additional kind of technical questions like the lease payment question, and do that as an intermediary step before the full report.
Thank you, Mayor, for coming. It's a pleasure to meet you in person. So
Great, thank you.
I don't see this happening without the blessing of Burlington, and without giving you some assurances that your investments over the years is going to get rewarded, and that you're not going to be financially responsible once a new governance, if it goes that way, it takes over. But I also believe that, in my own experience, I'm selling a business right now. I'm selling a business. I think I'm doing a great job with it. I think I'm doing a fantastic job with it. I bought it 7 years ago. I've done a real great job. And now the people coming in and buying that business from me are making plans to do things that are even unimaginable to what I'm doing. I think I know the business very well. But they're very confident. They're coming in, they're paying me lots of money, they're going to give me some cash, but they're also going to expand that business in a way that I don't even think it's going to work. But I have to believe that it's going to work. I'm going to get paid. It's going to go on, and I think that might be something here that could be going on here a little bit. That maybe there is a better way to build a mousetrap. Maybe that somebody who is actually like in my case right here, they've got 4 or 5 businesses just like mine. They've got a better mousetrap. They know how to do it better. And but I think it all gets down to proving to Burlington that we can ensure that you're going to be making as much as what you've ever made before, if not better, and to rid your liability as it moves forward. And I don't know what a study is going to hurt to look into that. And and I think the real big key is to make sure that these findings on the study is to not to harm Burlington in any way with the results of what they come back with. That would be very important to me, because I don't think that anybody's here saying that you've done a bad job. But I could see it as a very big win for Burlington to find a way to make sure that with the 100 years that you've been there, that you get rewarded into perpetuity. I think that's very important.
One of the things I really think we do need to think about, if you're doing a study, being very clear what it is, why it's being undertaken, and specifically what for what purpose and what you want to get out of it. We have a lot of studies, and they just add to the list of studies.
Right.
On the other hand, the argument is made, well, this is a regional resource, we're all impacted by it, the decisions made affect our lives and affect our communities, and we're just part of a commission that has no authority, and inevitably that can get tied up in city politics, and then we're taking a business and really throwing it into a political environment that may not serve it well. And I'm from the Northeast Kingdom, so I don't have a dog in this discussion. I'm not an involved community, but I think that's part of what we've been hearing, and that is, and some of it may in fact be symptomatic of a lack of sensitivity in the past in terms of how these communities have been dealt with, the communications, and ultimately how do you get how do you influence a decision that is going to impact your life every day? And we know from the news that City of Burlington politics, your life hasn't been easy as head of it. And that I think that has been a concern too, and the extent to which that gets compromised, or appointments to key positions, administrative positions, get caught up in that that political environment. So I'm just talking as someone who's kind of from the outside, listening to the testimony and the concern, and ultimately, as you say, it's the mayor who's, and in some ways I'm saying, yeah, that's right, the governor gets to appoint, key administrative positions. And on the other hand, they still have to be confirmed by the Senate. So there's some balance relative to the authority that that political office holds. So I can understand if we do it, you're saying we need to be much more specific and much more strategic in our thinking about toward what end and why.
Thank you, Senator.
Is that, that's only my kind of distillation of.
Well, and I agree with that very much. I think the study has to be very, very focused. And I think it has to get the mayor's blessing. It has to say, hey, this is a win for me. This is a win for Burlington. This is a win for me. And not only that, it's a win for this region. It's a win for the state. And it has to be, for us to even be discussing this, everybody has to be a winner before it's all said and done. If not, then how are we going to ask the city of Burlington and the mayor to even partake in the discussion?
Otherwise feeling like a hostile takeover.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I'm back to, is there sort of a interim step and work that needs to be done to help do the specifications that would be attached to any study? That's, I guess, one of the questions that has been presented to us.
Right. So what I would say is I really see this as that interim step. Governance matters. Governance is important. This was done in the 80s when Bernie Sanders, the then mayor, was trying to take some money from the airport. That resulted in a Madeline Kuhn in charge gubernatorial study that resulted in the Airport Enterprise Fund and the creation of the Airport Commission that we now have, and it's being revised. And then it also was functioning differently until Peter Covell's administration, when some commission powers were changed. So my point of this is, I think this study does exactly what you were just describing, which just looks at the issue and looks for the next 20 years. And how do we make sure that the airport is positioned for success, so that to some of the counterpoints to your testimony, I do see a problem with representation. The airspace over Chittenden County is not owned by the city of Burlington. And as a city councilor for the last 8 years, it has been very difficult to advocate for the right prioritization of different noise mitigation strategies, noise berms, sound monitoring, and so on. And we could go back and forth all day on that. My point of this is governance has evolved over time. City council in Burlington changed after a comprehensive review. Here in South Burlington, we're looking at adding counselors. I think this is a long overdue, very important study that has been called for since 2013, and presented by Maida Townsend, whose district has the airport. So I fully support the current trajectory, but I definitely recommend or would want to tweak the language so that the governor feels comfortable with, not the governor, the mayor, keep doing that. The mayor feels comfortable with the language. We did add another seat for the
state of Burlington, apparently.
I prefer that I got called last week the mayor of Vermont.
That's good.
You have at the end of the year, a bottom line profit for the airport. Is that kept separately, or it just goes into the whole mix?
I appreciate the question, because give it the opportunity to share a change that we've made in the last decade that I'm proud of. We of course we can't take a profit and just pocket it by the city of Burlington. Right. It is important, of course, that we earn more revenue every year than expenses. And there was a period, again, that period about a decade ago, when the airport did go through a rough patch, where we, for several years in a row, failed to meet our debt service covenants, which is a very serious matter, of course.
You had to kick in money?
We didn't have to kick in money. There was enough reserves that it wasn't an immediate issue, but it almost triggered a default on the bond. It created the possibility that we could have defaulted. So the way we solved that in response to that, and a lot has happened since this report that you keep referring back to. That report came out of this traumatic period in the city's history. I committed to turn it around. The way we turned that specific item around is we negotiated I think a very important lease with all of the airlines that fly in and out of Burlington International Airport that has them share the risk with us now. So we by contract with the airlines, our revenues will always be at least 1.5 times the debt payments. And if, because of our other revenues, like the garage revenues, or Skinny Pancake doesn't sell enough crepes, you know, whatever it is, that if we're below the revenues generated by the other sources, the airlines kick in the difference to get us back to that 1.5. And so, and that additional, you can think of it as profit in a sense. I don't think, we don't call it profit on the books, but that additional, that it adds to the sort of fund balance that the airport has, adds to their balance sheet. And you know, when it builds up to enough, then it gets reinvested back into other capital.
I didn't realize the police department is Burlington. So you have patrol people out there, so you must have to mark that up because you're short of police in Burlington, but you got how many officers out there?
Yeah, absolutely. The airport pays every penny of the true cost of
Security.
well, not all the security. The TSA, of course, is federal, but the police.
I thought Burlington police had in front.
No, absolutely, you're right.
Okay.
And that's by federal law. You have to have law enforcement officers there. They have to be certified law enforcement officers.
But wouldn't you want your officers back in Burlington and let it go out to bid or something, or no? If you make money on it, that's fine.
It's not that we're making money off it, Senator. I mean, we do put a markup on it in the sense that, you know, there's an administrative overhead element to it, and there's a reasonable, and if we and it's you know, it's fraud, it's a federal crime if we play games with it. So like, it is by appropriate accounting standards with cost allocations, we put some administrative overhead on it. I think it helps and strengthens our police department, and I would be opposed to having some other law enforcement agency that does it. Is it makes our police department stronger to have that additional responsibility and that additional role. It gives us sort of more flexibility and options in terms of the way we manage our department, and that is good. I mean, you know, anyone who's run, and I know some of you have been very involved in local law enforcement, you know, police officers are happier when they have a range of different duties over the course of their career. This allows people to have, you know, so it's something the officers that are out there like being out there during the time that they're out there. So I see that as a positive, as a positive thing, but not so positive that we want to do it inefficiently. What I said earlier, I'm hoping that the 8 officers that we have out there now can be cut back to 6 or something as a result of this investment that we're in. We're in conversations with the federal FAA about it.
The state house. I mean, we have the state house 6.
I want to be clear, that's not at a time. There are 2 at a time. So that's a 24-hour shift.
Yeah, that's my point, is that
They have cars.
Right.
Yeah, we have 8 assigned there because we have 3 shifts and then there's backups.
Yes, go ahead.
Mayor, how would you feel, or how do you feel in general about giving more authority to the advisory council? Is that something that you've kind of already made a hard decision about? Or when you talked about this report back with Secretary Flynn, would that be something that you would seriously look at? Or is it like you would look at it and say, we already looked at it, we're not doing that?
Senator, I appreciate the question. I feel like I may be the best qualified person in the world to answer this question, and that I served for 9 years on the airport commission before coming into this role. So I've been on both sides of it. I feel very strongly that I believe in chief executives. I believe
A locus of accountability.
Yeah, exactly. I don't believe in running big complicated agencies by committee. I think it is the right, I think we have it basically right, that we have that certainly, and this was, I want to make sure it's understood, this change that was made about the airport, this was a broad change to city government that so Senator Chitton referenced the fact, or I think it was no, that while Peter Clavel was mayor, we went from the commission running the airport to the mayor running the airport. Believe it or not, I still find this hard to imagine. The city of Burlington was run by 9 or 10 or 11 commissions for years. The department heads were hired and fired by the commissions, including the airport commission. The police chief was also hired by the police commission. The fire chief was hired by the fire commission. Parks, right? You know, all over the city. And the mayor's power at that point was limited to just budgetary authority. I think it's amazing Burlington. I still find it somewhat miraculous that Burlington became the city it did under that system. I can't imagine how it's hard enough to run the city with the kind of I found over the last decade with the authority the mayor now has. I fully support the mayor being a strong mayor form of government that, and I would strenuously resist anything that eroded that. And so the airport commission is really tied up in that. Are there details of that? Are there specific? I will say this, there are specific statutory duties that are given to the Public Works Commission. There are some specific statutory duties that we're considering giving, well, by ordinance at least, to the police commission right now as we're reviewing the way in which we do policy formulation and oversight. A general taking away of the appointment or somehow otherwise, putting the commission back in charge, I would have really serious concerns about. Are there specific duties that could come out of further discussion that we would want to say that actually is really the commission's job to do? I could imagine I could agree I could be supportive of something targeted and specific potentially. I don't know what that would be, but I just want to say I'm not like obstructionist of any change.
Any other questions, comments? Michelle, any questions?
No.
Yes, anything else?
Just to be clear, you oppose this, you've seen the recent language, like that we just got rid of the changing of to you, who's on it doesn't matter. You think it's a waste of time and money to do it.
Well,
Or maybe
I
we would
appreciate
put it
that.
to bed. Maybe we'll put this whole discussion to bed.
The study.
I don't know. I don't really know, but I guess the other.
What you were gonna
question
say,
is,
Mayor?
I guess I wanted to go back to the point you made, Senator Ingles, and I appreciate the question, and I think it puts us on the same point that Senator Kitchell was engaged with the attorney about earlier. I feel strongly that any discussion about the future of the airport should be a discussion with the city of Burlington. We are and for 100 years have been the founder, the owner, the manager, the federal sponsor of this entity. It is certainly our belief that cannot just be taken away. And I was encouraged to hear, I think if I heard Michelle properly and even Anthea, I think I heard Senator Chittenden say it too, that what is being contemplated is not a hostile takeover of the airport.
No, I want to make that perfectly clear.
So given that, and they were all in agreement on that, that is why I sort of suggested that if we're going to, I raised questions and concerns about doing this, but said if we are going to do it, the city should have half the seats on the committee. And the point behind that, I think is the important point behind that is if we're going to, Senator Chittenden sounds, it's very reasonable the way it's talked about. Let's just look into this directly. Let's just do a study. Well, I could maybe get there. Here's the thing though, I don't think we should think just studies, there are consequences to it. There are a lot of time and effort, a lot of staff resources goes in. So I would feel much more supportive and optimistic about some kind of consultant engagement. So if we took the time, and this is not, I hope this comes across as, I would put earnest effort into this, working with the transportation agency to better define what it is we think we're trying to address here, better define what the potential options might be. I mean, one of the options listed as your conversation showed is really not something, as your question showed, that's a hostile takeover, which really isn't an option. No one thinks it's an option. So better define what what changes, is a lease like this, for example, something that actually is available to us. I think we could do some good work and come back to this committee and have this question better teed up by next January, and then maybe I'd be in a different. But yes, that's a long answer to say yes. If you guys just go forward with the language as it is now, I don't support it. I think it's a mistake.
So I would hope though that if it moves forward, that you still appoint people to the committee to engage in it, because I gotta say, I think that there's a better way to govern this airport. I don't agree that there's no problem. I look at that 20 years ago and the city of Burlington then, whatever struggles they were having, I think commissions with direct oversight, evaluation, and management of some of the top leads might have addressed some of the issues that I've personally been dealing with on the city council for the last 8 years. I just think there is a better way to govern the airport. And I think this study would really do exactly what was called for, is to have an external perspective, not the city of Burlington, but instead looking at from a regional perspective, the economic engine that is the airport, to ensure its strength and stability so that we have the right financing options. So I'm still supportive of this. I hope that if it moves forward, and I don't know if it will, that I hope you will still engage with it.
One of the things I've heard is the airport has grown so much over the years. I mean, it's a big airport. It's a Vermont airport, national airport. It's huge. It covers the whole state. People, it is growing all the time. And nobody wants to shortchange Burlington because they are the owner. But if there was a way of do you have a separate sheet just for the airport activities throughout the year, finances?
Oh yeah, it's an enterprise fund with its own very segregated finances.
I think it's good to review that just to see what it looks like. Because I'm sure you employ a lot of people to run it. I mean, it's not easy. That's a big task.
Yeah, I mean, there's the team of direct employees to the airport is sizable but modest. The entity itself employs hundreds more, of course.
It's good to making money. You got to be making money. That's the bottom line. Otherwise, you would do it. So if someone said you're making $100,000 a year, and we'll make sure you continue to get that plus a percentage of the gross, why would you want to get rid of it? I mean, other than the ownership.
Yeah, again, I want to.
Yeah.
And let me try this again. I tried to answer this before, and I don't think I did a great job. The airport is important to the city of Burlington because it is a great airport. It's great. It's important for our economy.
We don't want to lose that.
We don't want to screw that up.
No.
And I think anytime you make a change, no, that's not what I'm saying. Although it certainly
get there. We run the Rutland Airport. We do a pretty good job, and that's a small airport. Not in comparison to our folks. I mean,
I guess I'm proud of the city of Burlington. Has done a good job of it for 100 years. And
nothing wrong with
any
that.
change is a potential erosion of that. I think we could find a way that it isn't eroded, that's at least as good, maybe even a little bit better. I don't think it's going to be quantum. I don't think someone's going to come in and find a totally different way of doing things. I think Senator Chin might be really upset, and his constituents might be really upset. We found a way to grow it faster than we have. So why are we doing this then? I just want to go back and just make sure no one watching this is left with the wrong impression that somehow the airport or I have not been responsive to sound concerns. I mean, we have found millions of dollars of federal money to improve the Chamberlain School, to put in place new windows, a new ventilation system that mitigates the sound issues there and improves the quality of the space. We have found something that will result in tens of millions of dollars of noise mitigation money from the federal government. The local match there, we got very creative. You can sometimes get creative about the local match. We got Vermont Gas to put in the local match so that we can weatherize thousands ultimately of homes. We think we could get weatherized because there is some modest additional noise impact. So, there was a rough period in relations. There's a rough period in the finances, and there was a rough period in the relations with South Burlington and with Lease. I personally put in a great deal of time meeting with former Senator Reilly, City Council President Reilly, meeting with the two mayors of Winooski in this period. I think things are in a better place today. And I guess that's the last point I just want to close with this. I think our current system, it self-corrects. It has correction built into it. I think having the mayor of Burlington, to me personally, having been on both sides of it, back to the earlier question, I think having the mayor of Burlington, who everyone is watching and who is accountable to the commission, accountable to the council, accountable to the enormous amount of media scrutiny, as you all know, means that this is a pretty nimble and responsive agency. And when there is a problem, people can make that a problem the mayor has to deal with pretty effectively. And I really wonder if we move to some kind of regional authority where you don't have an elected official, you have, some kind of appointed official who's protected from public responsiveness by all sorts of layers of bureaucracy. I'm not confident. The studies that have not shown that those are better models when this has been studied.
Any other states do this? Or are we unique?
No, Senator Mazza, the city ownership is the largest, is the plurality. City or county ownership is the plurality of the way airports are organized. Almost half the airports in the country are organized that way.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
There are many examples of that city ownership migrating towards regional authorities. So you can look at Syracuse, you can look at Hancock in Connecticut for many of the same reasons that I think were reflected in the testimony last Wednesday from the deputy mayor of Winooski, as well as the city council chair and vice chair of South Burlington, as well as Brian Searles, who was quite supportive of this.
I think respectfully, Senator, many is an overstatement from my perspective. And this is specifically in the city's report, and it was in that quote I read to you earlier. There have been a handful, I think, of agencies that have been in city ownership and have gone through a voluntary transfer. They have tended to be in response to serious crises, serious problems. Rare that they just happen as a result of one of these studies. And again, where there's been an attempt to a hostile takeover, the cities have been, at least with the example in Charlotte, have resisted it and been able to stop it. So I hope this has been helpful testimony in some way. I really appreciate the.
It's been great.
Really great.
I would think, getting back to your conversation with Secretary Flynn, as a first step is an RFI. You have put out a lot of issues that, from your perspective, need to be examined and really could be determining factors in whatever recommendation came out. I'm just thinking about if you're not, the committee wants to move forward with the study, that opportunity to engage with the city to make sure that all those areas of inquiry and concerns are reflected in that RFI. Because I think that you've articulated a lot of them today, and they need to be taken, given careful consideration, because sometimes it can be, we just don't like the noise, we don't like the traffic, we don't like the impact it's having, and yet if you're going to have an airport and you've got it in the neighborhood, some of those things that governance won't address, they might give the impression that it's more responsive or more, given more consideration, but in the end, the impact may still be the same. So that's my only thought, is that what that RFI looks like could be very important to make sure that it's we're all concerned about bias one way or the other, but you're concerned about bias toward one particular model of governance versus another, or that the concerns that you have raised today won't get the consideration that you feel they are warranted. But it's just something that I'm looking at Michelle as it relates to the conversation you referenced with the secretary.
I don't think that you can have any type of conversation without taking into consideration, Senator Kitchen, what you brought up, and without the city of Burlington feeling very comfortable about moving forward. I think it has to be a collaborative effort forward all the way through it, or it's going to be deemed as a hostile takeover, which I don't think anybody has even contemplated that that's what they want to do. I think it has to be very collaborative, and care has to be taken to make sure that everybody's concerns are addressed, especially Burlington's. I mean, without you, then it's what are we doing this for?
It's just a study. If they recommend a hostile takeovers, it's legislators that would have to do that. And I'm expecting the mayor or whoever the mayor is in that time, in 2024, would hear Burlington and say, absolutely not, that wouldn't work. So this study's not even calling for
And
anything.
the study would have to identify all the legal implications of all the different.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Pleasure very much.
Yeah, agreed. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, we need to take us off live, please.
Appreciate it.
Guys, right over to